Hi, welcome to the Continuity Insights Management Conference Series. My name is Bonnie Canal, and I am the Managing Director, Managing Partner of the Resiliency Institute. And today we're going to be talking about the ABCs of community resilience. I know you've seen this as these are being pulled from the headlines. I pulled these just the other day. We're talking about food insecurity, what's going to happen, business failures. We have bankruptcies everywhere, civil unrest, there are protests around the world. The pandemic, now you can't even fly anywhere. And disaster preparedness, how COVID has changed everything in getting ready. So what we see are challenges. These are the problems that are facing us today. The whole point of doing this webinar series for me personally was to come up with some answers. We're left with these challenges. How can we solve these problems? Here's our dilemma. People in communities have deficiencies and needs, and individuals have assets and capacities. You're looking at this and you're saying, is this glass half full or half empty? We've all had that question, and we all know the answer is that it's both, isn't it? It's always half full and it's always half empty. So how do we look at this and move forward? All of us are used to doing needs analysis. When you look at your organization, you say, we're going to do a needs analysis. What does that mean? We're going through and we're looking for challenges. We're looking for problems. We're looking for opportunities. Well, if you look at your neighborhood and do a needs analysis for your neighborhood, you will see things like this. You'll see there's child abuse four doors down, or there may be welfare recipients, or there are dropouts, or there's lead poisoning somewhere, or gangs, or graffiti, illiteracy. We're looking for problems. And that's what we see when we do a needs analysis on our neighborhood. But let's change that. Let's change and look at the assets that we have within our communities. Instead of looking at what's wrong, let's see what we have. So in our neighborhood, we have businesses. Doesn't matter whether they're thriving or not, they're businesses. We have faith-based organizations. We may have a park. We may have a hospital. We may have some seniors, artists. We may have community colleges, schools. I always look at this as saying, can we find what people are doing right? Can we see where people are and what they're doing right? So as you can see the difference in looking at what's wrong with the neighborhood, let's look at what's right within our neighborhood. If we focus on what's wrong or the needs map, this is what people will walk away with. There's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with me. I don't have enough. My relationship to my neighbor, it changes the we to them. So it's not the us in the neighborhood, it's those people. That data is that it has brought us together. Our money comes from community programs, often narrowly defined. So money comes in a certain way, but it's very, very defined in how we receive money into our community. Money can be misdirected. So again, money's coming into the communities that are providing services, not to the people in the community that need the money. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, we reward failure and foster dependencies on systems. So as we talk about is that we're not encouraging people to be successful. We're doing everything we can to keep people in that victim mentality. We have to encourage people to become independent of our systems. Our communities have a poor self-image. I often ask is, what do you see? If a community could look in the mirror for itself, what would it see? I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I have said this for years. New Orleanians looking in the mirror at New Orleans see a wholly and completely different city than you do from our community. And I would say that's probably true for your community as well. As we all look at our community differently, what is our image of our community? Especially now, if you turn on the TV, what are the images that we're seeing of your communities? And the most important part of this is this feeling of hopelessness. What can we do? We are stuck in this vacuum of there's nothing we can do. How do I get out? How can I make this situation better for not only me, but for our community? What can I do to make it better? So let's talk about this in terms of assets. So assets. Individuals are the only asset that will appear in all of these assets. So when you're talking this asset map, when you're talking about what's the most important thing within your community, it's the people that live there. You, your neighbors, the people within your household, you are the most important thing in your neighborhood. Why? Because you bring all of you to the table. You are what makes your community great. Your neighbor is what makes the community great. Why? Because you bring things to the table. Let's talk about some of those things. We talk about these in terms of sample personal capacities. So what kind of capacities do people have? Gifts of the head. So some people may know how to do art. Some people may know how to sew. Some people know a lot about history or movies or birds. That's something that can be shared. That's something that can be taught to someone else. That's a skill that people have that can be shared across the neighborhood. What about gifts of the hands? Carpentry, sports, gardening, cooking. Can you do any of those? Can any of your neighbors do any of those? Can that be shared within your community? So what we're talking about is an ability to find what you do within yourself and share it. And obviously, gifts of the heart is what do you care deeply about? Civic life, children, seniors, poverty, the environment. It could be trash. It could be any of those things. That's when you're starting to look at the individual and you look at their talents and you look at people's skill sets. It's not just what I do for a living. It's really all encompassing of who I am. And when you look at these gifts of the head, things that I know about, gifts of the hands, things I can do, and gifts of the heart, things that I feel, those are the things that make a difference within our community. Now that's how we start to build our community assets. The second asset that we're going to be talking about are associations. And the one thing about association, when you think about it, you see people standing there, aren't in their gifts. These people, through associations, freely associate. Their local clubs, groups. A lot of them are unnamed. And what they do is they come together to pool their assets or their gifts to make this association. Everybody has these associations within their neighborhoods or in their communities. Let's look at what a few of them may look like. So go into this. What is a local voluntary association? First of all, they're volunteer. It's two or more residents that join together with a common activity or interest. So it doesn't need to be, formal, doesn't need to be legal, but it's just people coming together. They might have a small paid staff, but members always create a vision and engage the work to achieve the goal. So what you get are people that are actively engaged, that are passionate about where they're going. They really care. Here's some examples. So you could have some elderly groups. You could have social groups. You could have religious groups. You could have mentoring groups. You could have women's groups, men's groups, hobbies and collectors, heritage. If you look through this list, I'm sure you'll see different type of groups or associations or clubs within your community. These are people that are coming together. Again, they don't have to be in this group. They're not paid to get in this group. If you have a book club, do you have to go to the book club? Is it required that you go to the book club? We're not talking about the peer pressure of the book going to the book club or the missing of the conversations that you missed at the book club. But we're just talking about, is it something that you have to do? Typically, these are things that people want to do. And these are the greatest gifts from a community, are these typical neighborhood associations. Let's talk about the third asset, which are institutions. The main difference between this asset of institutions and the associations is you notice how these are clustered. What we see in this is that they're very hierarchical. I practice that word. But they're very hierarchical in form and function. There is someone at the top, someone who has control. They share that control, and then that control is moved out across the institution. Why are these important? Well, for form and function's sake, they work, right? Our associations or our work, what would it be if you just had a cluster of people that came together and went to work? You know, well, there's some people that may be in charge, or some people that won't be in charge, or we don't know, or we don't have to come to work today because it's a day that ends in Y. What we really see is that this form and function structure of an institution works in a certain area. And we have to have institutions. But what are institutions? So institutions can be profit organizations, such as our organization that we work for, our companies. They could be nonprofit organizations, and they can be the government. One of the biggest differences, of course, is that their members or people that are in these institutions are paid to do the work. So they're there because that's where they get their money, and that's where they do their work because that's what they do for a living. That's how we define these. I do this for a living. I work for here. Are they inherently bad? No. Do they serve a purpose? Of course. But we have to understand they're not the only way to qualify or quantify our folks. Here's some local institutions: schools, libraries, nonprofits, as we talked about, health and human services, law enforcement. All of these are institutions that we have set up to serve us, to serve our community. Are they functional? Yes. Do they do what they do? Yes. And do they have a positive influence on our votes? Yes. The idea behind this is, how can we open this up to make what they bring to our community even better? How can we help our nonprofits or our businesses or our schools or parks or our law enforcement or universities? How can we engage them in a different way that they become truly part of the solution within our communities? That's the question. So let's look at these in a little bit different way. If we call an institution a hammer, if you look on the left, it's a hammer. If all we have is a hammer, then hammers don't always work well, do they? And we look on the right, we see associations and a saw. And saws, if that's all we have, don't always work. So the idea behind this slide is to simply show that we need both hammers and saws to make a good community, right? The human aspect of this and bringing this together is what makes the difference. But let's go over the unique characteristics of a large institution. The first one is they're about control. The idea behind that is that a few people can control a lot of people. We're used to that. We know that structure. They're the boss. They do what they're told, right? Your company has a CEO. Every organization has someone where the buck stops here. Is that form and functional? Absolutely. But understand that's what they're about. Why they work so well is that they're able to produce a lot of standardized goods and services. So they produce things and they can produce them well. So if you look at like McDonald's, you can go to McDonald's anywhere in the country, or basically now anywhere in the world, and order a cheeseburger and know exactly what you're getting on that cheeseburger because it's made exactly the same. Because that's what they're able to do, is this hierarchical institution can create something the same over and over and over again. So while we're in that system, we are part of that system, right? So we are just part of that process. Institutions need both clients and consumers to exist. So if you are a business, we talk about our clients, our customers, because if we did not have something, if we did not have our goods or services to sell to somebody, why would we even exist? The same thing goes for universities. The same thing goes to hospitals. As we've seen through this COVID pandemic, what's been interesting has been the hospitals that because they've had so many COVID patients, they're seeing a downturn simply because they don't have enough patients on the other side of the COVID. People aren't getting their other types of services need. They're not getting the operations they need. Ironic, isn't that? But so everybody needs somebody to sell something to. Same thing with a nonprofit. Nonprofits cannot exist if they don't have someone to exist for. So a homeless organization would not exist if there were no homeless people. Then if you look at that and you say, well, that seems to make sense to me. So their basic material are needs and deficits. So institutions are looking for needs and trying to fill that need, which is fine for part of the equation. Now let's look at neighborhood associations that's in contrast to that. Again, we talked about this. Members participate by choice. They're there because they want to be, not because they have to be. Remember, in that circle, they're just kind of standing around bringing their gifts. They're there to offer. That's a different way to communicate to people. You have to think in terms of how are we going to communicate in a different way. The members in this association are held by trust. They trust each other. They trust that that person standing next to them is going to be there tomorrow. Institutions hold their folks together partly and fundamentally different. Associations are groups that care about each other or about the same thing. See, now we're dropping into the heart. They care. We're here for each other. We care about Mrs. Smith that lives on the corner. We care about our neighborhood. We care about our streets in our neighborhood. We care about our school in the neighborhood. We care. That's different than I have to go to work every day. Can we exist simply as an institutional organization or an association organization? Can society exist either in one or the other? The answer, of course, is no. But the idea behind this is how can we bring both to the table to have a different conversation? We have built institutions that we are railing against that say they don't serve us. Well, they don't serve us. That's not their form or function. Their function is simply different. And we have to look at our institutions in a different way. It's not wrong, it's not right, it's just understanding what they bring and what they are. Let's look at the fourth asset, which is physical space. And physical space could be it's literally like buildings, land. If you look at your school in your community, it's sitting on something, right? Look at the land around that school or the school itself. Or if you look at your faith-based organization or your nonprofit, is there something there, some asset, some physical asset, space, land that can be utilized in a different way? We see a lot of this with community gardens. In my neighborhood, we have empty lots that are being used for community gardens. So what can we do with that community garden? Well, we can use that produce to feed people within our community if we want to. We can give the food away. If we wanted to, if there's an association is attached to that, we could sell it and use that money for something else to build part of our community. We could take our school kids and let them be responsible for the community garden, teaching them where their food comes from, allowing them the opportunity to get their hands in the dirt and understand the environment in a different way. We could bring our seniors there and have them work with the children in our neighborhood and letting them share their experiences in this community garden, letting them share how they do things. That's a little bit different. That's just a very small example of how physical space within our community can be utilized across all sectors. So we could bring in our government, because it could be something that we could bring our government in to do some type of event there. All of this is your for-profit. Is there something that a Home Depot, a Lowe's, any of those, a Walmart, anything like your corner grocery store or anything, how can we get our folks involved? This is what all of this is you're looking at this and saying, as we build or start to pull away what's in our community, how can we make our community stronger, looking at all of the assets within our community. So looking at this, you have both physical, as we've talked about extensively, social, capital, and economy. So we've talked about this as recognize your physical aspect, your assets, and the economic ones. So in looking at this, if you're looking at your businesses, those are economic capitals that were economic engines within your community. Do you have or do you need more of those within your community? Do you have a corner grocery store? Do you need a corner grocery store? Do you have someone, do you have a barber, someone that does your hair? What if someone that does cut hair? What about someone in the neighborhood? I mean, you look at all of these things and start to look at your assets that are within your neighborhood. Look at this with different eyes. Again, we're so trained in our lives to look at things in a straight way. This is just how it is. This is just the way it's done. What we have to do is to kind of take a step back and say, let's look at this differently. So start looking in your own self and say, what do I bring to the table? What are the skill sets that I bring? How can we start to utilize all of the skill sets within our community? Let's look at this completely different. Someone who has spent a lifetime in the computer business or in the IT sector, we all know garbage in, garbage out, right? Or you say things like, I always do, you're not asking me the right question. So part of this is, let's start asking the questions differently. Let's look at this differently. How can we build this within our community? How can we build partnerships? How can we build our community network that's stronger? And how do we keep this going? what we have now at this time are people asking questions. People are questioning everything. They're looking at this and saying, I don't think this is working for me anymore. Perfect. Let's start reaching across the aisle, across the yard, across the fence, and start building partnerships. Start building relationships with those that are others. Let's bring us together and continually grow and say, this is how we can build a better community. This is what we can do to make things better. Our fifth asset is exchange. If you look at the two arrows along the bottom, this is what we're talking about, the exchange within the neighborhood. So you talk about this as what we were saying is the hyper-focused local economy. Our work forces us to look at supply chain. All we have to do is look to earlier in this year about challenges within the supply chain. Things that we need come from some other country, or things that we need are coming from some other part of our country. How is it going to get here? What we have to be able to do is to look at our communities and say, what can we build within our local economy? How can we focus, hyper-focus on a local economy? So what does that mean? Can you share assets? Of course you can. Of course you can. You can share lawnmowers. You can share, tools. You can share a lot of things, right? You can trade. I can trade you for this if you give me that. We see that all the time. We can barter, right? We can barter. I'll do this for you if you do this for me. We can do some exchanging, right? So we can do exchanges, one thing for another. We can babysit. We can create a co-op. So the idea behind this is let's look beyond what we have and say, what can we do in our community that keeps our community alive? Can you utilize the social media tools that are out there? Nextdoor, they have a great opportunity. You can look on your Nextdoor app and see what's going on in my neighborhood. How can we engage people? What about Facebook? My neighborhood as a local, we actually have 2 local Facebook groups where people are offering to do things for each other. We've had 3 pop-up bakeries in my neighborhood. And I don't live in a big neighborhood. 3 pop-up bakeries in my neighborhood. What happens is, and so now they're competing against each other on the best sourdough bread. I don't know what's up with the sourdough bread, but everybody's out there trying to make the best sourdough bread. So what's happening is people are looking to do things differently. This is how our economy can grow at the hyper-focused local level, is by looking at things differently. So let's look at this. This is a very busy slide, but let's look at this visibly. So you have a local religious or institutional organization. So you have some type of religious organization within your neighborhood. In my neighborhood, we have 3 churches and 5 bars. It's New Orleans. But if we go in my neighborhood, there's a very large Catholic church in the center of my neighborhood. They also have a very large open plot of green space as well as a parking lot. So you look at this and say, what can we do with that church? Not only with that church, but with that land. Well, we could have, if you look in this particular case, we have artists. We could have artists come in the green space and teach children how to draw, or have a drawing session, painting session, whatever they do in our open space, so that for senior citizens to bring people together. There could be a charge for that class. There could be a barter for that class. Who knows, right? But this is how, now we've got something going on within our community. Business associations. Well, can we have, even with social distancing, can we bring businesses to sit around on the outside of this for this artist class and offer different things for sale. If there's food, can we sell food at this event? What about, I mean, to me, the idea behind this is to really look and say, let's look at our physical space. Let's look at the assets of the folks within our community and how can we bring them together in a physical place differently. One of the things that we've started to look at in New Orleans is something very, very simple, is for hurricanes, is a physical place for what we call a respite center, both for after the storm. What we're seeing, especially now, is, FEMA says you should have 3 to 5 days worth of food, and Florida says 7 days for after storm, which is totally fine. But if we don't have power, what does that look like, right? So part of what we want to do within our faith-based group for our church is build a respite center at our church that has a cooling center. So seniors or folks can come and get cool there. So obviously it means it has a generator, a misting center where people can come cool off. Power station, obviously, to come plug your stuff in. Some barbecue pits, right? So people can cook their food there. Some first aid supplies, some food, some water, some diapers. So what happens is people know this is where they go after disaster. This is where they can be, and they can be safe there. The city can push information out because they have trusted sources in our community that they know we can get this information to them. So part of this is, how can we look at this, what we do, and just do it a little bit differently? How can we engage our citizens and our institutions, associations, and physical places in a little bit different way? Our sixth asset is culture, stories, and history. As we say in New Orleans, it's culture. But every community has culture. Every community has a story and a history. I live in a state where 80% of the people that live here were born here. It's crazy. People don't leave Louisiana. I know what you're thinking. I think the same thing, but we just don't leave. So for us, we know our culture. We know our story. We know our history. It's in our DNA. But where you live in your community, do you know the culture? And I'm not just talking about we don't do this or we don't do that. Where did this come from? Talk about what goes on in your community. If you live in a community and you don't like the culture, can you talk about that? Like, we don't do this here, or we don't say that there, or this is how we do things. Part of that is just understanding the mores of what we have within our community and being able to have a conversation about that. The stories that we say about ourselves come from. My community was built in 1719. It's the second suburb of the city of New Orleans. The history of where I live, called Algiers Point, which is directly across the river from the French Quarter, is very interesting and very dark in many ways. We held the slaves before they were shipped across the river to be sold in the French Quarter. That's the history of where I live. It's important to know this. Why? Because it keeps it real for us. We understand the blood that's on our hands in our city. And that's important, especially today, in understanding the role that we've all played, our history has played. And part of this is to learn from that and grow from that and take this further than we should, or than we ever thought we could. And really starting to define this and really starting to have these conversations that we don't want to have. When we had Katrina And everybody saw this. We talk about this a lot. A little wind, a little rain, a little water. It flooded our city. Over 80% of our city was underwater. The thing that we were most concerned about, buildings can be rebuilt, stuff can be replaced, was the folks that left that may never come back. It was who we were, how we defined ourselves, the people that kept us moving, the people that were the keeper of the flames of New Orleans. And after that, we saw this massive influx of 18 to 25-year-olds, no, 25 to 35-year-olds that came in after the storm to decided they wanted to live here. The concern was they're going to come in and start telling us we need to be like Dallas or Houston or Atlanta. Nothing wrong with those cities, but that's not us. What they did is they came in and they embraced our culture. And they said, we want to live in this city because of who this city is. Culture is the fiber and the DNA of every community. And part of what we have to do is get back to our culture, our stories, our history, and really have these conversations about how do we take this and move this forward. You can use stories, videos, photos, all of this. It may not be good history, it may not be the best history, or it could be the best of all, but you can't deny it. You have to own it and move forward. So let's go over again what we talked about, our 6 community assets. Individuals. Typically, when we're trying to do any kind of assessment, we start from the top down, don't we? We look at the institutions, we look at the associations, we look at all of this. What we are talking about is we've got to start where all of this is at the person. In business continuity, we do plans. We write these plans for these processes, for our organization. But who does the plans? Who are the ones that are going to actually be doing the stuff? Well, it's pulling a lever or doing or turning a switch or whatever it is that these plans do or say that's going to happen. It's people. And people are the most important process of all. So we start with individuals. We start with me. Then we move to our associations. We look at our associations. If you follow who you are, where do you belong? Where do you spend your time? Where do you want to spend your time? What are your friends groups? PTA, church associations, book clubs, youth clubs, football clubs. Where do you freely associate your time? Then you look up to where do you work, the institutions. Who do you interact with? Your school, it could be your kid's school, the library, city hall, it could be anything like that, your business, again. You look at the space around those institutions. How can we utilize that space in a different way? How do we change between all of them, processes, goods and supplies, ideas between individuals, associations, and institutions? How do we change this exchange? How do we do this hyper-focused local economy? How do we do this differently? And then cultures and stories and history. How do we tell our story? Because that's really what we do every day, is tell our story as to who we are. You turn on the TV at night, there's our story. History is our story. Our future will be our story. Today is our story. That is the one thing that we can have an input on, is our story, our culture, and of course our history. What we know is that every story, neighbors know it. Everybody knows everybody's assets. Everybody, it's always funny to me is I live in a city where, somebody says, do you know somebody? And I got somebody. I got a guy, so that's really what it is do you got a guy? I got a guy, right? So people know what other people offer, right? People know, well, so-and-so can do this or so-and-so can do that. So it's out there. Neighbors know about their neighbors. And successful neighborhoods are connected. What successful neighborhoods really begin to understand is how they can start connecting the dots. How can we bring Tom, who's a carpenter, to Mary, who needs some work done in her backyard on her fence? Tom can fix that for her, no problem. How do we connect those two together? How do we do that? Well, again, with social media, it makes it a lot easier, but we've got to really, is there a process for that? Is there a way to have these conversations? And the one thing that we have to understand is that to connect these assets, there has to be some type of connector, right? There is no through the ethos kind of things. So it could be an individual, it could be an association, it could be an institution, it could be social media, but there has to be a connector. And so what I always look at in terms of what we're looking at is a physical connector. Some people, and you know those people, they know everybody. You've got those people in your neighborhood around. They know everybody and they know what everybody's doing. And I'm not talking about, they know everybody and they're not happy with everybody. I'm talking about the people that really do know. I have a friend in the neighborhood. If I need to know something, there's two. I know exactly who to call, because if I don't know, I know one of those two will know the answer. And they know exactly who to call. But in doing our community resilience projects, what we need to find in this connector is someone that is gift-centered, someone that is really willing to look at things differently, to really come at this with an open mind and an open heart and open hands, to allow people with different skill sets to come together and encourage people to look at themselves a little bit different. Obviously, they need to be well connected. They need to be trusted within the community. When I used to teach salespeople how to sell. And I often would say, in order to do a sale, you have three parts of the sale. They have to know, like, or trust you, right? So you talk about which is the most important, know, like, or trust. And the answer is always trust. Right? Again, you know them, but that's okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to buy from them. You may like them or you may not like them. It doesn't matter. But if they trust you, then they will buy from you. And so that's really what this is. If someone is trusted within your community, then you're going to have more people that are come to them and work with them as you move forward. Obviously, it believes me is welcoming. You need that's going to be a great proponent for your community, someone who stands out there and believes in the potentiality of your community and sees where this can be and see where this can go and see where we can build on something. And if your community isn't welcoming, then works on that as well, right? But there are certain aspects of your community that will always be welcoming. What do you do next, right? So here's 3 planning questions. What is the vision? You always talk about this, is what is our vision and what assets do we have to make that vision come true? To me, it's what is it that you want? Begin with the end in mind. Where do we see our community in being? I talk about this a lot. A lot of times you have developers that come into a community and see value there. So they're going to build an apartment complex because there's land there. Or a large grocery store is going to come into your neighborhood, and because they need, this looks like a great space to put this. But is this really what the community needs? Does this community really need more apartments? Or does it really need this big grocery store with all these parking spaces? How is it going to affect the community? So part of this is really starting to understand the vibe or the tone and texture of your neighborhood. Tell me a little bit about your neighborhood. So again, my neighborhood is what we call the bedroom community. We don't really want a whole lot of stuff here because we don't really want a whole lot of different movement in our neighborhood. One of the things we don't have is a very large grocery store. We have a very small neighborhood corner grocery store. It has enough supplies to keep us going. We have 3 restaurants. That's all we need. Because again, who's going to go out to eat a lot here? So part of this is starting to understand your community. So as we look at our vision, it's like, what can we achieve using our own assets? How can we achieve this, right? What can we achieve with our own assets if we get some outside help? So if we do this internally, what does this look like? If we get some help from the outside, will that be better? Will that move it forward? Will it expand our vision? Do we need that now? Do we need it in 6 years? I mean, these are the kind of questions. And what can't we do with our assets that must be done with outsiders? So is there something that outsiders need to have influence over? Does something need to be rezoned? Does a street need to be repaved? Is there a house that needs to be condemned? So are there things that outside influences absolutely need to have happen? In doing this and putting together our community plan, our understanding, what this allows us to do to go back to the institutions that are there to serve us and say, this is what we need, or this is what we want, as opposed to people telling us what we need and telling us what we want. What we've done is switched the power. So from an institution, from a client, we've moved to a citizen within our own community. We've moved to citizenship, which means a full participant in our own environment, in our own community. That's what citizens do, is they get involved. They are an active part of their solution. We will no longer need some of these institutions. They don't need to, they don't need to serve us, or we don't need to be served by them. Let's put it that way. We become our own person. We move from victim, we're victim of. No one likes to be in that victim mode where things happen to us. That's what victim is. For us, this happened to, and then here comes that social service organization. Now we're a client, right? So now I'm a client of all these people because I've got a bunch of stuff, and now I'm a client, right? And then if I get good at it, I become an advisor. So now I can tell other people that are either victims or clients how to be better, right? Then I become an advocate for them, for the whole thing. Or I become a producer. I become a citizen. And that's really the difference within our communities, is we talk about raising people. This is the raising people. This is the way we raise our children, is we want all citizens, all people to be an active part in our community, to reach through, to be the best they can be. The most powerful neighborhood is a place where neighbors are producers of the future, rather than just a victim, client, consumer, or advocate. Producers produce tomorrow. This is a great, great, great idea. Reach out to your folks. Be part of your folks. Learn from them. Love them. Listen to them. Listen. What do they know? Build on what they have. But in leading people, the most important part to this is people look around and say, we have done it ourselves. Allow people their power, to own their power. That's what makes a strong community, is people standing arm in arm. You know, you're only as good or only as strong as your weakest link. We want to build those weakest links. This is how we can build within our communities. We can use this in building within our social structures at work, our social structures within our family. It's the same premise behind this. But the idea is, how can we build? What do we do? How can we take this to the next level? I want to thank each and every one of you for the opportunity to share this with you. As a native New Orleanian, looking out, we have seen, or I have seen, many opportunities of where we missed. During this time, I've done a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking is, what's next? Where do we go? We've got to come together. There's no other way to do this. Because it's us. I don't know what else to say. It's us. Here's my contact information. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please never hesitate to reach out to me. This is a dialogue that has to continue. Thanks very much, and enjoy your day.